I think we're ready to get started. Was waiting for Commissioner Twitty to get here. Of course, we're starting about 35 minutes early. So if we can go ahead and begin here in about 2 or 3 minutes. He's 20 minutes out. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Keene. I'm Chair of the Water Quality Committee, along with Vice Chair Ellison and the committee members. We have one that is not here, Commissioner Twitty. We are starting about 35, 40 minutes earlier than scheduled, but we do have a quorum, and I'd like to welcome everyone here this afternoon. On the preliminary matters, we will, of course, call it to order. And by doing so, with the statute, the North Carolina General Statute 138A-15 mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of the board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. Chair also shall inquire as to whether there are any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. Are there any from any committee members? Then we will proceed. We'll look at the minutes of the last meeting, November the 13th. So everyone had a chance to look over those. And when you see that they're appropriate, then I would entertain a motion that we approve those.
Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Mr. Bumgarner, motion to approve those. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ellison, thank you. Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, like sign. Thank you. Passes. Our first item today, we have 3 action items, and first one is the request approval to proceed with EMC with the schedule for readoption of part periodic review of existing rules for 15A and CAC 02K. Toby Vincent, Demler. Thank you, Toby.
Thank you, Chairman King. Glad to be with you all this afternoon. Welcome to the Archdale Building. I've got a quick presentation for you here to review this, but our meeting today, this is just the next procedural step for us in the readoption for our 02K rules for dam safety. As you're aware, the reason we're at this point is because the RRC approved the original report for the categorization process that we went through in the prior step. And so we're here today, like we said, to request approval to proceed to the EMC at tomorrow's meeting with the schedule for readoption for the periodic review of existing rules. Just for a quick slide there and just reference, these are the categorizations that we went through with you at the prior meeting. And this was the schedule or overall picture of where we are through the process. And this is the proposed readoption schedule that we worked out with our rules coordinator in the department. And, given the information that we know that we're going to need to work on and update, as well as working with that coordinator and with you and the commission and the RRC to complete this process. Would you like me to go through each one of those in case you have any questions for that?
Please. Yes.
Okay. So looking at February, if we're able to proceed and go through the commission this week, we will proceed to stakeholder consultations on the draft rule language. We will be looking to you to take lead to give us guidance on how you would like us to proceed in that manner and which stakeholders you'd like to make sure we keep and don't leave out through that process. Through June and September of this year, we would look to complete the proposed rule amendments based on the information and the coordination that we're able to get through facilitations for any meetings with stakeholder groups. October through January. We've got to do fiscal analysis on this. I don't anticipate great involved fiscal analysis because a lot of things that we're going to be looking at and discussing with you for any amendments to the rules, a lot of it's already, either in law or it's something that's under standards of practice for engineering. So a lot of it's already being done, but we'll make sure we cover that, discuss that through the fiscal analysis. And then coming into March of next year, we'll be working with you again to consider the draft rules and fiscal analysis to proceed to the full EMC, hopefully in May of 2026. In late May, we'll have to file notice to OAH for publication in the register and then go to public comment for June through August. September through November, we'll have to develop the hearing officer's report for that and then back to the EMC to adopt for final adoption of the rules. And, that looks like there's plenty of time in there, but, I know you've been through several rulemakings and I know I've been going through 3 different sets right now, and it never feels like it's enough time. But this is what we worked out, and this is time that we feel that we need to be able to work with all involved to make sure we get the rules where they need to be. And with that, the request of the committee is to request approval to proceed to the EMC at its January 2025 meeting with the schedule for readoption as part of the periodic review of existing rules for 15A and CAC 02K. Any questions?
Any questions for Toby? I have one ask of the department, I guess, would be in the western part of the state. I believe when we discussed this to go in today's agenda, there was a question, I'm not sure who it was from, might have been Commissioner Ellison, in reference to dams and permitting on the western part of North Carolina due to the hurricane. So has that been considered moving forward, any of the dam permitting in western North Carolina?
Is your question related to the rules themselves or a separate question, not
I guess it
related?
could be a little bit of both.
Okay, well,
Readopting the rules, but there's always amendments to rules.
right, correct. There's nothing in the rule set that's specific to any particular region. There's not really anything anticipated in regard to rule amendments, et cetera, that might be only for Western North Carolina. As far as permitting goes, as far as any of the impacts that they've had from the storm, the generalizing and consistent set of rules should be able to address not only the mountain regions of the state, but also the Piedmont and coastal plain.
Okay. Any comments or questions from committee members? And if so, let's talk about that now and get that over and move on with a motion. Is there a motion on the floor then that the request be approved? Commissioner Ellison?
I'll move that we
Put that up.
move the, put your,
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
that we proceed to the full EMC with the schedule of readoption as proposed by the department for the periodic review of existing rules 15A NCAC 02N.
Motion's on the floor.
Okay.
K,
Land use.
02K.
I make a second on that motion.
Commissioner Reardon, second. Any discussion? Commissioner Deerhake?
I just have a process question. So the next step will be the RRC establishing a readoption deadline. And it says early 2025, they'll establish that deadline. But are there any activities going on that require consideration of Western North Carolina circumstances and their ability to participate in any?
Who participated in the rulemaking, is that the
Yes,
question?
Yes.
Any of the stakeholders that are identified, we will make, most are going to be more than ready and willing to be able to assist with that. The question is, how large do we make the stakeholder group to make sure that it's productive? And as far as inclusion goes, we have a good history of making sure we're including the universe is represented well in most cases.
Any other questions, comments? If not, then we will vote on the motion. All those to approve the motion, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, thank you. Thanks, Toby.
Thank you.
Our second action item today on the agenda is request approval to proceed to the EMC with the schedule for readoption as part of the periodic review for existing rule for 15A NCAC, the O2B, O2H, O2T, and O2U. Karen Higgins. Karen, thank you. Happy New Year.
New Year to you all as well. This package has a few more rules than Toby's, so I'm going to go through this group. So this review was approved by you all in September. The RRC approved the report as submitted by you all in October, and then the legislative committee did not meet within 60 days, so it became effective December 31st. We have not received a consultation request as of just a second ago. So this may or may not actually be on the agenda for tomorrow, but we're going to go ahead and go through this this afternoon. So as a reminder, there's about 360 rules in this package in 4 different subchapters. There were 3 rules in O2H that were categorized as unnecessary, and those rules expired and were removed from the code on January 1st. The balance of the rules that are necessary will go through a readoption process. And so we're talking about the schedule that we plan to propose to the RRC for those readoptions. So I said 361 a second ago. Before the committee, we have 354. There were 7 rules heard previously by the groundwater committee. They'll all be presented as one package to the EMC when it goes before you all then. So for the 354 rules, we propose to break these into groups. When we did the round 1 readoption, we similarly broke these into groups for the commission, for staff, as well as stakeholders. It's a lot to process 350 rules all at once. So the grouping is done based on division as well as program. So right now, Group A is Demler. They have 36 rules that cover all of their stormwater programs. Group B is the Jordan and Falls Nutrient Management Strategies. Group C are the rules in 2T and 2U, excluding section 1500. Group D is the beloved triennial review of surface waters. And then Group E is everything else. That's sort of the kitchen sink rules in 2B and 2H, covering a variety of different permitting programs and management strategies. So I'm not going to go through a super detailed schedule, although you all do have it in your attachment. The slide got real busy when I broke things up to individual steps, so I just kind of gave broader generalizations. But this is, again, similar to what we did with round 1. Group A, the stormwater rules, they were doing the readoption as well as responding to another session law, and they completed their process in January 2017. So we're looking at having them finish in January 2027, and then going through the rest of the rules. Last time we finished in, the deadline was June of 2019, so we're looking at June 1st of 2029. The Group B rules, the Jordan and Falls rules, the reason those are pulled out and put up earlier is there was a session law passed in 2016 that pulled those rules out of the round one readoptions. So they never went through a readoption process. So our staff and the stakeholders in those two river basins have been working a lot and are very anxious to get those rulemakings moving forward. The other one that's pulled out again is the triennial review. That is pulled out for a couple reasons. There are some regulations in the Federal Clean Water Act that dictate we do that every 3 years. So based on where we are with the current triennial review, I've scheduled out the next triennial review. The other thing is because all those rules have to go before EPA, it's convenient for them and us to lump all those into one package. So I know that's a lot of information about all these different rules. But last time, again, this is very similar to what we did. We were able to meet all the deadlines as established by the RRC. So with that, we're requesting approval to proceed to the EMC with the readoption schedules as presented for 2B, 2H, 2T, and 2U.
Thank you, Karen. You're always thorough. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any comments, questions from committee members? Commissioner Baumgartner.
Karen, just one question. So just re-understanding the process, I guess. Readoption of the rules. So within the 25-26 timeframe, this committee would have draft rules or draft changes that would happen to the rule, come to the committee to be in that readoption process, or how does that work? I'm sure there will be some tweaking in that rule drafting physical note process.
Yes, so the readoption is every rule has to be readopted. So it could be readopted exactly as it is, or it could be every word could be rewritten. So it's just like any other rulemaking process, we'll go through that. So the idea is that as Toby went through, we work internally and with stakeholders to see what changes need to be made, put together that rule package, the fiscal note, and then bring that to you all. So this is a guide of a schedule, but in theory, the January 2026 is when the first package would be before you all for action.
Commissioner Drake.
So previously, they were all bundled together, and I think we had 2 or 3 hearing officers working on this together. So now we'll have a hearing officer for each of the 5. Is that correct?
The only difference this time is the Group B, but last time we did split them out. Demler, as I said, the stormwater rules went through a separate process because they had to put all of their SCMs into rule from the BMP manual. So they went through a separate process, a separate rulemaking, and it had a separate hearing and hearing officer. The 2T and 2U rules went through on their own. The triennial review went through on its own, and then the 2B, 2H rules, those were actually, I think, even split further. I think the new Centaur rules ran separate with a separate hearing officer from the rest of them, but we're proposing to do it all in one this time.
I was just trying to remember, Chairman Solomon, we have one really big package
You were on it with Dr. Rubin, I believe, on the 2T, if you remember.
and
'cause
one
we-
other person, yeah.
Yeah, there was 3 on that one, and we had 2 or 3, I believe. Commissioner Keen was on the one with the new Centaur Pamlico rules, I know too, maybe. At some point you got on there. But some of these packages had multiple members and some just had one. So again, I think we'll have to look at what the changes are, and then the chair will make that decision of 1, 2, or 3. But I do hope with all these rules review and readoption that they are EMC members that do it. That's kind of been the way I've done it last time and this time, because It's pretty significant, some of them, when you start tinkering with stuff that's been around for 10 or 20 years. So,
I agree.
anyway, okay.
Thank you. My memory was slipping there on this.
Well, 124 rules is a lot in one package, so.
And you were scarred because that 2T did scar you. It scarred me back then. Remember that? We had so many meetings on that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, there's a request. Do we have a motion on the floor that we honor the request, approves the request? Commissioner Baumgartner?
Mr. Chair, I move to request approval, well, excuse me, I move to send to the EMC with the schedule for readoption as part of periodic review existing rules 15A, NCAC 02B, 02H, 02T, and 02U.
T. O2T? Okay. All right. Yeah. Motion's on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Jerhake, second. Thank you. Any discussions? All those in favor say aye. All those say no, no. It's passed. Commissioner Kevin Twitty just came in. We thank you so much. Commissioner Twitty, we did start a little early. Sorry. I'm sorry. Commissioner Reardon did a great job with the other committee. Finished it in like 20 minutes. It was nice. Our next action item, number 3 on the agenda.
They don't want to go. All right. This one, then.
Let me grab that up.
This one here.
Proposed amendment to 15A NCAC 02B .0202 pursuant to Session Law 20236,
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Sorry about that. No.
Division of Water Resources. Michael?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Michael Pajetra, Deputy Director with Division of Water Resources. We're getting a file queued up. Thank you.
Michael, I just wanted to make note that the regulatory impact analysis was included in the attachments going out to the public when this agenda was released, but this particular piece attachment was not. So we are bringing that to the committee today, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct. The RA was included and was posted. The PowerPoint that will be up is just an explanatory document.
Thank you, sir.
Not recognizing it. You pull it off the website. That'll work. There you go. That one. First one. This one. Yes, sir. Yep, it's perfect. There you go. Okay. And
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Michael Pajetra, Deputy Director with Division of Water Resources. The PowerPoint slide you see in front of you is what was not posted on the website. It is just an explanatory document. In March of 2024, Water Quality Committee approved a motion to move the rulemaking to the EMC, provided that the regulatory impact analysis RIA was edited. The DWR requests that the Water Quality Committee approve the December 31st, 2024 RIA, which is what was posted on the agenda, and to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission to request to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed amended rule 15A NCAC 2B0202 as directed in Session Law 2023-63. So going back to the revised RIA, which should be on your screen now, and that's what's linked. Again, as we discussed in the spring of '23, we presented an RIA. There were some edits that were requested. Those edits have been made. OSBM has been provided this revised RIA, and it has been approved. As we scroll through it, the primary changes and edits to this RIA are contained just in the language. We did update some of the dates here to coincide with today's meeting and the projected schedule moving out through the year. And purpose and summary of the rule amendments. This is where some of the edits may have occurred regarding the RRA, just in terms of the session law establishes consistency between the state's definition of wetlands and the federal definition of wetlands. Regulation of waters of the U.S., WOTUS, including wetlands, resides with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and/or the EPA. Statute diminishes the state's existing authority to regulate some areas not covered by federal rules. Otherwise, the rest of the IRA remains the same. And again, at this point, if you have any questions, be happy to engage, but we would go back to the request, which is to move forward with the OSBM approved RIA and go to the EMC in March.
Good. With this, I'd like to remind the committee members that this has been on the shelf now for a good bit. And speaking with a couple of committee members and the EMC chair during this agenda process with Director Rogers, we asked the DWR come with the wetland piece, and let's get this over with and finish up for the year. So that's this on as an action item today. Is there any comments or questions? And I'll take those at this time. Commissioner Baumgartner.
Yes, sir. I actually was, I guess, the one that made the motion to make the edits back in March. Looks like staff and Commissioner Ellison and Chair Keen have worked on those pretty well, and I don't have any objections this time.
Commissioner Ellison.
I'd remind the committee that only the edit to the revised RIA is the issue at hand. So with that in mind, I move that we proceed to the full EMC to request public notice and hearing for the proposed amended Rule 15A NCAC 02B.0202 with the amended RIA.
Is there a second? Commissioner Baumgartner seconded. Any discussion, questions? All in favor of the division request in the motion? Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
That concludes our action items for today. Our next item, number 4, information PFAS minimization plan concepts. Julie Gribb, I will, before I ask Julie to come up, and she's got some material that she'd also like to pass out, I would get into this sort of a brief explanation of this information item today. It's the week after our November 12th meeting, and time being of essence due to staff year-end vacations, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year holidays. Vice Chair Ellison and I met with Director Rogers, Julie Gibb, and EMC Chair Solomon to discuss the committee's directive for PFAS minimization initiative for major and minor industrial direct discharges to surface water and significant industrial users, SIUs, that discharge to publicly owned treatment works, POTWs. With that in mind, moving forward and building the framework around this alternative approach, our aim was to have significant information from DWR today in January. It was a huge lift for the staff during all of that time. Number one was to present to the Water Quality Committee at our January meeting today to begin this complex process. Number two was to identify and present to the committee in January existing minimization approaches, including best management practices, BMPs, that have been successfully implemented in North Carolina and nationwide in relation to other complex chemicals, pollutants, including mercury, PCBs, and nutrients optimization. Three, begin engaging industries, business, SIU stakeholders, and just recently, consider the views of public water and sewer utilities about how we can best work cooperatively and effectively to minimize emerging contaminants statewide while improving water quality, which ultimately is in the best interest of public health, the economy, and the environment. Julie, thanks to you and your staff for a job well done in preparing and launching this information with attachments to the public just days before Christmas and in time for this meeting. Respectfully, there will be time after Julie's presentation for questions and discussion from committee members. Julie, thank you very much. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your kind words.
Thank you, Julie.
There's just one slight change to the presentation. I moved the slide up and added one a little bit earlier in the presentation. So I'm handing out the copy so you can follow along exactly as I'm saying it. So as you all may remember, in September, there was a motion from the Water Quality Committee to direct the department to propose a draft rule and a draft RIA to establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and require PFAS source reduction plans as part of every industrial and SIU municipal pretreatment. And to get to that, we have a little bit of work to do, and I needed a little help from the Water Quality Committee. So in November, after an information item, the Water Quality Committee directed that the WR staff develop a PFAS minimization initiative for major and minor industrial direct discharges to surface water and all SIUs that discharge to PODWs. The minimization initiative will require monitoring of PFAS, implementation of minimization activities required to eliminate or significantly reduce discharges of PFOS, PFOA, and Gen X over a 3 to 5 year period. So what I'm about to present is really, just as it lists in the title, a concept of how we might go about doing this. Okay? This is not intended to be a proposed rule. It's simply an information item, and it was a concept that addressed all these factors as requested by the motion. I think this slide is the most relevant. There are 3 phases to any minimization plan. There's the investigative monitoring. Who do you monitor and how long? In this case, we're talking about SIUs that in direct discharges that discharge to a PTW. We're talking about the direct dischargers, mainly those all that are industrial related and may contain wastewater discharges that have PFAS pollutants. Okay? We would want POTWs to do some sampling as well, because you want to see what the reductions are happening and how they're affecting the plan. The next phase would be a minimization plan. Who does a minimization plan? Who doesn't have to do a minimization plan? Who decides that? Do you just let DWR decide that, or do you set a level, or do you let the POTWs decide it for SIUs? Could be whatever you'd like. These are things that we need to consider for a rule, though. Why do I say the POTWs? Because I just do want to make it clear, POTWs are the control authority for the pretreatment SIU facilities. Implementing it, is there a set goal? Are we trying to reach an end reduction goal overall, mass loading to the state? And mass loading at each POTW? And mass loading from the direct dischargers? A yearly reduction? What is our goal? So these are 3 phases. The Water Quality Committee may only want to address 1 phase, or they might want to address 2 phases. I don't know. This is what I want you to think about today. Commissioner Keen's asking that perhaps we don't discuss any of this right now, but these are the questions I want you to think about as I go through my slides. What portion of the 3 phases of the minimization plan does the Water Quality Committee want to address? Monitoring, minimization plan development, source reduction. Does the Water Quality Committee want to set a target level or screening level that would trigger a minimization plan? Does the Water Quality Committee want to require source reduction to achieve a certain target level overall? So please think about these as I go through my slides. So the presentation goal is pretty simple. We want to know the affected permit types, things about monitoring, who will be required to implement a PFAS minimization plan. We talked about, and I believe one commissioner asked about your data. You have data. What does that show us? So I wanted to show you some of our data. It's a very limited data set, but I'll just show you what we have and what possible levels based on some of that data might trigger an action. Timeline and snapshot of what the minimization plan might be. When you do have to develop rules, you have to think about authority and enforceability to make sure you write the rules properly, that we can get done what we want to get done. And how do we measure success? So that's things to consider and what I hope to present. Again, it's just a concept. It has not been vetted in any way. So who would be required to monitor? Well, the Water Quality Committee has pretty much dictated that it would be industrial and direct dischargers. And it would be NPDES industrial direct dischargers. Okay. And then POTW, so we could just see what's coming into the plant now and what progress might be being made. I have a footnote here because it's always important, and you'll see the numbers, that if we're looking for people producing PFAS, creating PFAS to reduce levels, to minimize, change substitute materials, whatever might be needed, best management practices to reduce PFAS in a minimization plan. But the state, as you have all know, PFAS is ubiquitous, and sometimes what's coming in is what's going out. We're certainly not after those facilities. So who are we talking about? So I wanted to give you some numbers. Broken down by basin, we have all the SIUs that are in each basin, and then the POTW. So essentially what that first line, if we look at the broad basin, we have 7 POTWs that have 25 different SIUs discharging to those 7. Of course, the bigger basins are that where we have SIUs are the Cape Fear, are the Neuse, are the Yadkin, and the Catawba. So in the Cape Fear, again, one of our biggest industrial user basins, we have 165 SIUs. We have 29 POTWs with treatment programs who address those SIUs specifically. And so I wanted you to see these numbers. Overall, you can see from this chart that the SIUs are, without a doubt, the predominant number of industrial sources going to state waters eventually, indirectly, okay? As far as major and minor NPDES direct dischargers, we have 56 majors and 48 minors in all basins overall.
Just to read the graph, the third column with POTW 126. Those are covered in the 595.
Yes.
So there's 595 that are SIUs that go to the control authority. And then on the right, those last 2 columns in to be about 100. So you're talking 600 plus 100, talking about 700 total industrial entities that are discharging. 100 out of the 700 are going directly into the river somewhere, and 600 out of 700 going to the retreatment facility. So,
That's correct.
okay, just make sure I understand.
Okay. So again, who would monitor? This is just our suggestion, and a lot was based on the Michigan plan. Okay. They really found that quarterly monitoring is how they started out. And if they were exceeding some level, then we would recommend that they might go to monthly monitoring so we could see what's really happening. You'll see PFAS really fluctuates. You'll see some low levels and then some high levels. So we really are trying to catch all the different campaigns that industrial facilities run so that we really know what the PFAS levels overall that are being discharged. But our suggestion is if its results exceed a certain threshold, then monitor monthly. If they're below a certain threshold, but they're not non-detect, to continue to monitor quarterly. And if it's non-detect for 4 consecutive quarters, then we could look at reducing the frequency. Okay. We all expect them to use the latest EPA almost approved test method, 1633, and to report those results to DEQ. Okay. Then there's just a concept, SIUs. If they have, who would do minimization plans, right? So if they're above a certain threshold, and that can be anything, even just greater than detection, okay? The SIUs should look at doing a minimization plan, best management practices, look and see where the PFAS is coming from, okay? And industrial direct discharges would be the same, but they would report directly to the agency. We think, and this is our suggestion, that the SIUs would report to the POTWs. They could report to both. It's however we want to set up the plan. I think these are important numbers because I thought I would show you PFAS levels observed at public water supplies with surface water intakes. And why is this number important? These numbers are important. Again, these are average. I'm telling you, there is usually a pretty good range. But these are important because these are the waters that are going into the SIUs. This is what most of the SIUs are receiving, these levels. They're going into the plant. And then, so for instance, the Cape Fear. What we observed at public water supplies for surface water intakes, their PFOS is averaging around 14.3. Okay, these are nanograms per liter, parts per trillion. And you can see we have a limited database. The N equals 16 means this is just results from 16 facilities. 16 public water supply surface water intakes in the Cape Fear. Yes, they have. I can't answer that. I want to say 3, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay.
Quickly, so 16 in the Cape Fear, that's up and down the whole river basin, and would they have the same number of samples for each facility, or could they conceivably vary up and down river?
I would need to, well, they certainly definitely vary, okay, but I'm not sure the numbers for each one that brought us to this conclusion, okay? PFOA averaged 8.14 and Gen X 3.74. Again, this is in the Cape Fear based on 16 public water supply surface water intakes, okay? And lumber, you can see there's 8.67 PFOS and 8.33. So the numbers aren't low. Okay?
So this is limited for the water intake. How many, you guys have been sampling other things, how many industrial facilities, out of those 700, how many samples do you have like in the fence line or right outside the fence line?
So I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Because this is just river intake. So
Right.
I don't know where this is coming from.
Right. I thought these were important because when you look at a minimization plan, how do you decide if the SIU needs to do a minimization plan? Okay. And so I'm going to get a lot more into that a little bit, but you need to know what's coming into their plant a little bit. And so these are numbers coming into into those plants. So total, all this was a data set of 41. This is based on. I did just want to remind you what was proposed as water quality standards for PFOS, PFOA, and Gen X, HFPO dimer acid. That's what those numbers are there. There's what we had proposed for state standards. While literally the day that I submitted this, EPA came out with their own draft, National Recommended Human Health Ambient Water Quality Criteria. That would be an in-stream standard. Again, these are draft. You can see they either match ours or they're lower. I do want to remind you that we would not put these low numbers ever in a permit, that we would always put what they monitor, what you can monitor to. That's not relevant right now anyway, but anyway, I just thought I would point these numbers out to you.
One more question. So I want to make sure, because there is an argument here, you can look at these numbers and say certain basins need, maybe everybody needs to do a minimization plan in certain basins. We really don't have enough numbers other than the Cape Fear to know how big a problem it is in the basin, because some of these you only have one sample point, two sample point, right?
Well, as far as surface water intake, those are the numbers that we have.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just making sure, because.
Yeah. Oh, great. We need a lot more data.
I can look at the first PFAS column and make some sweeping conclusions, but then when I look at how many sample events I got, I'm really not sure if the Roanoke is really 5 or not until I have more sample events. Right, so it could be more, it could be less.
Yeah, it's without doubt, we have the most data from the Cape Fear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you leave the slide, please, Commissioner Deerake.
I was just going to ask for clarity on conducting the session. You said you wanted us to hold all questions until after the presentation.
She doesn't have but just a few left, and she has numbers to come. Thank you. But I was recognizing you. Courtesy. Go ahead, please.
So this slide is a breakdown of the number of public water supplies with surface water intakes with concentrations greater than 4, 12, and 20. It's taken the same data from the last slide, but just telling you how many of these intakes are above 4, 12, and 20 for these different parameters. So in the Cape Fear, 14 of the surface water intakes are greater than 4, 9 greater than 12, 3 greater than 20 for PFOS. And then 15 for PFOA are greater than 4, 3 greater than 12, and 2 greater than 20. Gen X is not truly representative. We just did the lumber and they did not include Chemours in this evaluation because they're under consent order. That was probably wrong to do. We will have to update. So everybody listening and everybody, Chemours is not included in these estimates. So that's a mistake and we should have included it. But overall, we have these 41 and you can see kind of what's happening in each basin. Surface water intakes. A little bit more information. Again, this is just some information because you'll see when you put it all together, how did we come up with the phases in the last plan? How did we come up with some things? That's why I'm trying to educate you to understand this. As of December 2024, DWR has received data for the following number of facilities. So for POTWs, we sampled 39 out of 126 POTWs with pretreatment programs, and that's a list of the basins that we sampled them in. Industrial direct dischargers, 9 out of 56. Those are the basins we sampled, and 100% domestic. We wanted to get some control numbers, only 4 in the Cape Fear. Okay, and this was a quick study we did. It was fairly expensive, to be honest. We had to put a lot of staff on it, but we wanted to get the data. Okay. I will also clarify that most of these were ones we knew had PFAS at fairly elevated levels. Okay. So what is the average influent going to a POTW in this state? So what we saw with just 2, 100% domestics, you have to understand sometimes data doesn't come out the way we want. So even though we had 4, 2, we may have had to throw out the data because there was something that went wrong at the lab and we couldn't use that result. Okay. So 2, we saw at PFOA 5.8, PFOS 8.88. Though I will say 5 to 8 is what Michigan found as a typical numbers as uncontrollable. I'm not saying it's ours. I'm just showing you the data. POTWs with SIUs, significant industrial users, we did 37 of those. And these were the average values influent to the POTW that we were seeing. It's just about 12 for PFOA. It's about 29 for PFOS and about 12.5 for Gen X. And then for the direct industrial dischargers, for 4 of them, we saw PFOA around 19, PFOS around 55.5, and Gen X about 2.5. So I'm trying to help you understand this information. So the estimated daily mass reductions by SIU minimization target for POTWs with pre-treatment programs with influent data. So if we look at 38 facilities and we get them to reduce the PFAS coming into their plant to 4, we would reduce the overall loading to the surface waters 76% for PFOA, 82% for PFOS. If we went to 8, we would reduce PFOA 56% and PFOS by 65%. Okay, if we look at 12, PFOA by 42%, PFOS by 50%. Again, the Gen X number really just based on data in the lumber. So, and why the lumber, I'll be very upfront about that. There's a landfill that collects, took waste from Chemours, and that leachate from that landfill goes to the lumber wastewater treatment plant, and that's simply why you're going to see higher Gen X numbers there. And we graphed it going another way, so you could just kind of see the trend lines, depending on what levels POTWs or everybody got the SIUs and the direct dischargers down to. This is just for POTWs. I have another chart for SIUs if they're reduced. However, I'm going to say this does not include the uncontrollable. If the uncontrollable didn't get reduced too, then these numbers would not be this high. And uncontrollable, I mean residential areas. Okay. And so this is for the direct dischargers. If you had a screening level of 4, PFOA would reduce overall mass loading by 75% and 95% for PFOS. If we had a screening level of 12 for direct dischargers, we would reduce PFOA by 48% and PFOS by 85%. Okay, you can see that there's significant reductions that are occurring for PFOS at any screening level you pick, but it certainly gets more tighter as you go down. So for our concept of the main thing out of this whole slide is that whenever you write a rule, we want to make sure we give people the tools they need and the tools to our staff to not only implement this program, but to be able to enforce it and see that it gets done. So I'm just suggesting here that we need to give thought to that. And if it's, whether it's us with the Division of Water Resources going out to direct dischargers and how we regulate SIUs, that we just make sure we establish those things in the rule. And then indicators of program success. Well, we just want to reduce or eliminate PFAS sources to POTWs and to state surface waters. Now, I'm going to say, Commissioner Keen, you know that we want the word eliminate in there, okay? And I think it's a matter of how you read the word eliminate. There are certainly ways, one significant industrial user, if they eliminate a product line or they substitute a whole material, they've eliminated PFAS from that source. So it's a matter of how you interpret the word. I think the minimization plan would result in some elimination from certain sources and certainly just reductions in other, though certainly uncontrollable is an issue, and that could be for a later date. So the questions that still remain that would help us continue and to actually write this RIA or produce on will be what portion of these 3 phases that you find in the minimization plan does the Water Quality Committee want to address now? Okay, do they want us to pursue just monitoring? Do you want us to pursue monitoring and a minimization plan development? Do you want us to pursue all 3, monitoring, minimization plan development, and source reduction? And if you do, does the Water Quality Committee want to set a target level, a screener level that would trigger a minimization plan? Or do you just want to leave it up to the, I don't know, control authority? Okay. And does the Water Quality Committee want to require a source reduction to achieve a certain target level? Okay. Do we have an end goal that we're going for at this time, whether it be interim or final? Okay. And so those are things I just am looking for when you discuss this and to help guide us to move this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation, Julie. We have a hard stop by that clock at 3:30. So we've got an hour to discuss, and if it takes us a little less than that, we certainly will do that. But I think that's plenty of time for the committee to work and discuss this presentation. We've made time for that. There are a lot of comments and that the committee members have expressed to me since we finished this. So the floor is open now for comments and questions, discussion. Commissioner Ellison.
Just a quick comment for right now. When we look at defining success, and we look at how to achieve certain target levels and all that, there are two ways to do that. We can, and she had Julie had on one of the slides, you know, timeline, 2 years, 3 years, excuse me. But when it comes to an SIU or an industrial discharger, in the minimization plan, that can be measured in terms of discrete concentrations, like 20 within the first 2 years, and then get them down to 15 a year after that or whatever, or it can be done on a percentage basis of what they're contributing. And so I just wanted to point that out, and also point out that we may want to consider a compliance period for the SIUs and the direct dischargers, so that they can have time to use existing stocks of a particular ingredient, to give them time to ramp their compliance toward the target.
Commissioner Twitty.
Julie, is there anybody that could slip through the cracks, in your opinion, with this plan, as far as dischargers? Because we're targeting SIUs, but is there any realistic probability there's someone that doesn't meet the classification of an SIU that could be a discharger that would be a concern? That may just be my lack of understanding about how
Yeah,
SIUs are
it's actually a
defined.
good question. So here's what I would say. EPA came out with a list of industrial users that they really want the country to target who have PFAS in their wastewaters. Okay. And so this plan concept has all SIUs sampling initially. So it's actually broader, a little bit broader than what EPA expected. And so it also, and it would be a later question, would we really include any MPDS direct dischargers that doing groundwater remediation? We may not want to include those. We just may want to include those that EPA targeted, or ones that we know have PFAS that we've seen in this state. So those are some questions that comes into when you get to the finer details and you're trying to vet it out. But I think this is pretty inclusive, quite frankly.
Yeah. Okay.
He had a follow-up, I think.
A follow-up?
Well, a second.
Commissioner Wade.
You mentioned that there was an issue with the landfill leachate. How is that leachate reaching the surface waters? And is that a situation where there's no ability? Does that represent an example of a situation where there's no ability to treat that except at a POTW?
So it's at Sampson County Landfill, and they had taken waste from Chemours sludge. Okay, and so what happens when it rains? It goes through the landfill and they get leachate. And that leachate currently is being taken to the lumber wastewater treatment plant for disposal. Okay, and that's why those Gen X numbers are the way that they are. However, we were having discussions currently with that landfill on them installing treatment on that leachate and then not taking it to the wastewater treatment plant anymore.
But it is being collected in that instance.
It is being collected and it could be treated, yes.
Commissioner Solomon.
Yeah, just to
DNC
be
Chair.
transparent, to make the clarification, this has been going on for a while. In fact, it's got a grant from the Division of Water Infrastructure to look at improving the lumber wastewater treatment plant to handle this PFAS.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, all the debate we had on this last year, this was going on, and I don't think this commission knew about it. I didn't know about it till later part of last year. I think it's something that we need to think about, are we gonna let waste hauling or piping go across basins? Because we start talking about it being ubiquitous. Part of it being ubiquitous is we may be letting people transport it into other rivers that we shouldn't be letting it. It brings up the question here, how does Gen X get in or PFAS get in the Lumber River? Well, it's being brought in from a different river basin. Should we look at doing that? Now, the department's not suggested that, but as we get into this deeper, that may be a question that we want to ask to say, confine it to the basin it's in. But there's no rule or statute saying that right now, I don't think. And the department's not asked us to do that yet.
No, but I will say, if we sampled and investigated and monitored all SIUs going to treatment programs, we would be able to pick that happening out.
And I agree, and I think that's one of the big goals that we get out of this, when you talk success. We don't have a lot of data now in the water bodies, but we don't have any real data on a lot of these industrial sites. So we would know, as a first step, did this come from the river basin, or what the sources of this PFAS were? We would make them declare they had it or not, and we would sample for it. That's a huge victory, if nothing else, to identify who the PFAS players are, because we don't know right now. So.
Commissioner Ellis.
Just to build on that and clarify, with the SIUs and industrial dischargers, they're sampling both their intake and their effluent. Is that the idea?
Actually, when I presenting this, they're really just sampling the SIUs going to a POTW are actually just sampling their discharge to the POTW.
Okay, but you had a slide showing that the intake water.
Yes. So if they believe that their intake water, I don't know that we would make them do it, but if they believe their intake water was the only cause of the PFAS, then they could sample their intake and show that. Okay. So I think that it's just a matter of the details on how you write this up.
Well, I guess that would be the follow-up question. Do you recommend that the sampling be both the influent and the effluent at an SIU or a direct discharger so that they can demonstrate?
For a direct discharger, I think that's going to be necessary. For the SIUs, I think you give them the choice.
Okay.
Fluent or effluent?
I'm sorry?
For influent or effluent?
For whether they do the influent. Again, what they would be measuring is the surface water intake, probably the public water supply water that they get, though some of them have wells. But I think you would give them the option whether they look at their influent at the same time to see if that's their source of PFAS.
Okay. Commissioner Twitty.
My only concern with that issue or that approach would be, if, let's say somebody collects data for a year or two and the numbers are high on the effluent and the response is, well, our influence probably high too. Well, now you got a sample for another year or two to prove that. So if it was made policy that they've got to sample influent and effluent from the start, you may avoid some delays down the road.
More data is always better, but it is costly. And I would just say that's the benefit of having some sort of screening or trigger value, because that gives these plants some sort of guidance.
Yeah.
What do you really care about? If it's greater than 12, yeah, they should, after that first sample, they should start sampling the influent. Okay.
You can
If it's
structure
less,
that.
yeah, if it's non-detect, well, then probably not. So, I mean, that would give them the help and guidance they need to know what they should do.
Okay.
I've got a comment on that then, the effluent that you mentioned and moving forward. Monitoring this draft analytical method through did you mention the 1633? So how does the effluent piece would work on that 1633 with the EPA? How's the state working that through NPDES permitting and so forth?
So,
We're talking about the
pretty
fluid.
much the EPA has settled on 1633, and for wastewater, they have really finalized that portion of it. They just have not published it. And so most all states are using that method, and they're writing it into the NPDES permits. What we have done is said that as long as it's not certifiable, which it's not until it's published, and even though they really have finalized all the work on it, we're saying use 1633, but you can report it to us as a supplemental data sheet as opposed to putting it on the DMR. And once that it's actually published and they can certify it, then they can put it on their discharge monitoring report. And why would they do that? Because our state regulations are kind of clear that you only submit certifiable data. And you have to sign a statement that says this is done with a certified test method. And so that's why we said, for now, we're telling you this is the method you have to use. It's what EPA, it's what everybody wants you to use. It's just put it on a separate supplemental sheet and we'll collect it that way.
Yeah. But for PFAS and on the EPA part, the affluent PFAS monitoring it shall, not may, but shall be conducted using the approved EPA PFAS method 1633. So that's what they're discussing. But when you go to affluent monitoring, and we're doing that with NPDES permitting now with the state, we're using that tool. Can't we explore using that tool more in depth as we move forward in this process? Would it be somewhat easier?
I'm not really clear, using what tool?
The NPDES permitting piece that the state's using now.
Well, sure, we can use an NPDES permit to put this in. It's just that I'm saying how they report it
Yeah.
varies until the test gets certified.
Okay. You brought the 1633 in, so I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
how
and I
that
will point out, there's
1633
a lot of things about 1633. It's really not been approved for a composite sample. However, there are people using it for a composite sample. It really has to do, I think, a lot with the tubing and other factors that can contaminate a sample. So
Okay.
there are things like that we have to consider.
Okay. Commissioner Drake.
Thank you for the presentation. I do have 4 or 5 different points or questions to make, and if you decide you want to interrupt and let someone else speak and come back to me later, that's fine.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I see a waste minimization plan being more of an implementation plan for a rulemaking where you have a target or a goal, a number, that a concentration for discharge as you're trying to reach. And I see the benefits of a minimization plan, but you have to have a number from which to work back into the designing and carrying out that minimization plan. That's just a general remark about that. I also see the benefit of having this applied on a statewide basis. We talk about 14 basins. There are 3 not listed in one of the slides, and maybe it's just because none of the compounds have been found in those waters.
Or we have no data.
No data,
Yeah.
okay. So again, I think because this is such a pervasive and persistent chemical, we need to think about this as a statewide program, but not just the basins in which we know that we found evidence of the chemicals. So that's another point that I wanted to make. Also, on the monitoring slide, which was number, I can't read it, number 6.
Number 6?
Yes.
Okay.
Slide 6, or it might be 7 now that with the revision.
Oh, okay.
It's
one?
the one that says, the title of the slide is monitoring frequency.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. The sub-bullets list the 3 categories that monitoring would be required at least quarterly. But I also wonder, wouldn't it be beneficial for any, you might say, downstream drinking water intake if they detect a sudden surge a spike in their influent and people upstream are unaware of it, shouldn't they be able to trigger some monitoring program too? Can they not be involved in some level of monitoring of this so that they have a voice, not just the POTWs who are managing significant industrial users? What role could they play in such a program as this?
Well, I think it's a good point. I do think a lot of the public water supply intakes will be sampling for it because don't forget, they have the Drinking Water Act to meet and they will be pulling samples because they have to show compliance by 2029 with the MCL. So I do think they will be collecting some of that data anyway. And I guess the way we've written it in permits, just to give you an idea how this might be approached, is that if they're above a certain level, that they report those levels to downstream water intakes. And so that might be one way to do it. Might not satisfy what you're looking for, but then usually those downstream intakes start sampling. And especially if there's a slug of something and it's reported, some, as you noticed with 1,4-dioxane, some water intakes just don't take in any water for several days, hoping that that slug goes by. So that's sometimes the best we can do. But I hear what you're saying. We could certainly add that in.
Yeah, okay. And then the definition or the scope of the term significant industrial user, and I think we're probably using our experience with the dioxane settlement as a model for how this is being designed here. But there were different levels of significant industrial users, right? And they didn't necessarily turn to all of them immediately when they were seeing spikes in their
So maybe I'm
POTW.
wrong, but my understanding, significant industrial user in the pretreatment world has a very set definition. Okay, if it's a facility discharges X amount, or if it's a categorical industry, or if it's something else, then it's a significant industrial user. So I think it's defined by pretreatment regulations.
So there are other industrial sources outside of that
That's correct.
definition that could be discharging. And so that is my point, that if we focus just on the SIUs, we may be missing something.
Okay, that's an excellent point, and I missed that one. Yes, you're correct. We could be missing it. So what Michigan did is they went with the SIUs first, and then they realized we're not getting everybody, and so they expanded. But they started, and they did it as a step. Okay?
Yeah.
They started with SIUs, and then they expanded because they learned a lot as they went along. Yeah.
Which leads me to the comment about whether or not it would be beneficial to inventory or to try and understand the industrial universe discharging to POTWs by looking at their NAAQS categories. Would that be of any help?
Yes, the answer is yes. And what Michigan did come up with, and I figured be something we will work on here, is they actually helped each PTO, but they came up with a survey that each POTW could send out to all their industrial users, and they could expand that beyond significant industrial users. And when they got that back, they were asking exactly for that information and very more specific information on the materials used at the plant so that they could decide how much sampling that facility should do. Because again, if the facility says we run 24 different campaigns each quarter, 2 years, and you'd want them to sample for 2 years so you could find out discharging. But yes, very much so that that's true.
Okay, all right. Just one or two other points. Are you using the words screening and target interchangeably? That's a little confusing.
Yeah, I am though.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. And they're all health-based numbers?
No, I did
Not
not say
health-based
that.
numbers.
No, they're just, we presented health-based numbers. Let's be clear about that.
Right.
That we were asked to come back with a minimization plan, and maybe at one time we were discussing a target level. And that's why I'm just carrying through with that. These are not health-based numbers.
I'll put you on the spot. I'll put the division on the spot. This is the division think that getting to a targeted, just selecting a target number has to have some connection to health.
Just a comment on that. I agree, and I was just wondering if DHHS has been a stakeholder to this point with this proposal, or are they anticipated to come alongside and work with you to get a health report?
Are the stakeholders hoping to get?
The DHHS, a stakeholder, the
Oh.
department.
So first of all, let's be clear, nobody has been a stakeholder in what I'm presenting today. This is a concept that I'm just presenting to you to move through what you requested. So that they have not, there's no stakeholders at this point. We had stakeholders when we presented the health numbers and we discussed it with them. At this point, we have not involved any stakeholders.
Follow up, Commissioner.
Just quickly, so right now, the POTWs have a list of SIUs and they administer the pretreatment program. If whatever data come in, and like you said with Michigan, they realized they were not catching everybody. And so additional monitoring was required from additional customers. Was that still administered by the POTW? And in North Carolina, would that be the way it happens? Or would the department be looking for some of these other potential sources?
I believe in the Michigan case, it was administered by the POTW. And basically what they did is they did their SIUs first, but sometimes they'll set up composite samplers at lift stations. I'll say, boy, we had 6 SIUs implement a minimization plan and we're not seeing a reduction. And so they go up. They don't have to ask everybody to sample, but they go up and they start asking people in that area to sample.
Thank you.
If I may
Yes,
go back to some of
Chairman
those
Solomon.
questions, and that'll maybe, in my thinking, I think we got 2 forks with that target of that, call it target level, a screening level. With the screening level is, I think in the original discussion, we talked about everybody doing it. So all 700 of these people would have to put a statement in saying, are you using PFAS or not? And at least one grab sample in my mind to prove, even if they did know it or didn't know it, you didn't have false positive to the statement, but you'd get all 700 people nailed down to say, you think you use PFAS and there's at least one grab sample to prove it. That was in my original mind. That's what I've said at a couple meetings. At that point, you've got to proceed on and say, we're going to leave some of these people alone that don't have it, that said they don't have it, and there's no evidence they have it on one sample, and say, okay, others of you past a certain screening level have to get more aggressive with your plan and start demonstrating you're using BMPs and maybe doing quarterly monitoring. But the people that are below a certain level and say they don't have it, we've got them under enforcement if they're lying to us. And some of them might, but at least at that level, we're not making everybody in the state, all 700 of these people do quarterly monitoring for PFAS. But we could make them without a screening level, just say all 700 of you just go at it. Or we could put some kind of screening level done. Michigan used 12, I believe. I think the DOD, Department of Defense, uses 12 to say people above a certain level have to be more aggressive. Certain below a level don't have to be as aggressive. I think that's something for the EMC to work out. But I think to get everybody documented the 700 in some way would be great. But to make people do years of quarterly monitoring, if you don't use PFAS, that may be considered too extreme. That's up to us to decide, I guess.
Commissioner Twitty with a follow-up, then back to Commissioner Derrick.
Just to follow up to Commissioner Solomon, but would that approach leave too many cracks in the floor for somebody to slip through? So I'm not an industrial process, you are an industrial process expert. If we just did one grab sample, is there a chance that grab sample is taken during an industrial cycle where they're not producing that particular compound or substance that may be done later in the year? And so how do you deal with that?
Of course. And I think there's 2 arguments there. You make them do more sampling. Maybe one's not enough, maybe it's 3, but you're putting a cost on people. The other thing you got to do out of 700, we don't know how many of them are doing PFAS now, but let's say we find out that 100 of 700 total are doing PFAS. Well, there might be 150, 50 may slip through the cracks, but we know the 100 that probably are the worst that have admitted they're doing it. And we know they're doing it. So I'm just saying, I agree with you, but I don't know that we can make this thing bulletproof or perfect off the start. And you're not suggesting
I
that.
don't think
know.
we should try to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Personal
Yeah,
opinion.
we got to find the sweet spot.
If I might say, that's part of the point of the survey. If they only make one product year round, you're probably getting a representative sample. If they make different products, then you might say, oh, you got to do a year. I would like to bring us back, but to a little bit, because I really, it's my goal to get answers to these 3 questions so the division can move forward. A lot of these details you're talking about are generally what we try and divvy up with the stakeholders, okay, because they know their permittees the best. And sometimes we try and work with them to come up with the exact process. And so I just want you to consider that.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Deerhake, back, your follow-up questions.
I'll just a comment and then I will answer try and give you my opinion of the answer to the question. But I think that my suggestion about using NAAQS codes needs to go beyond just asking the facility, do they use this compound? NAAQS could help broaden and capture even more facilities just to be safe. Also, these facilities, at least based on the dioxane experience, they may not think they're handling the material at all, but then there might be a reaction byproduct that they were unaware of. How are we going to capture that? But just by saying, do you use this? So we have to try and anticipate, and maybe the NAAQS codes would help that. And again, sorting facilities based on their activities, if they do batch variety of reaction processes, that's a flag that may want to capture more attention from the state. So, so then just to try and answer your questions for me personally, what portion of the 3 phases of the minimization plan does the WQC want to address? Monitoring, minimization, and development source reduction? Yes. Does the WQC want to set a target level that that would trigger a minimization plan? I would say yes, but it needs to have some health connection. Does the WQC want to require source reduction to achieve a certain target level? Yes, either source reduction or mitigated entirely, eliminated entirely. But again, all of this needs to be health-based, in my opinion. That's why we have all of the attention brought to this chemical, is because of the health concerns. And we have to use that as some point in the design of all of this to have a reference point that deals with health. And again, all of this, as I've said before, as you've mentioned too, needs to be enforceable. And how can this be enforceable if there's no rule to work with? So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Deerhake. Commissioner Ellison.
Back to Commissioner Deerhake's mentioning that you're showing 14 basins and leaving 3 out. I seem to recall a slide from a previous presentation where there were no PFAS found in the Watauga system, and I thought there was a second river basin that did not have PFAS detected and a third that only had like 2 samples or with very, very low concentrations of very few species. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, so some of our slides, it depends where you're looking at, the public water supply information or the industrial discharge information. But I think when you just look at the industrial discharge SIUs, the reason you don't see other basins is because some basins we don't have any SIUs in. It
I
doesn't.
think these were surface water samples from the
Okay.
rivers,
For the public water supply intake.
perhaps from the intakes or just
Yeah, because I
samples from the
do
river.
think, like, the Catawba didn't have any, they had 3, but they were all non-detect. They didn't show any PFOA, PFOS, or Gen X.
Okay, but this was from a couple meetings ago, and again, I think the Watauga and something else out west, but that's okay, we can.
Yeah, I can comment on that. That was data that was from our intensive survey branch that looked at various points of surface water samples. They weren't necessarily strategically sampling at locations that might have captured some of these discharges, but it was a snapshot of the data that we currently have available.
So there are some basins with, based on limited data, have no PFAS.
I think it was the French Broad that had all non-detects.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question for the committee and the commission chair. Given the amount of effort that we've already done, that the commission and the committee have put into this, I'm curious as to if we were very aggressive, and this gets at one of the department's questions, how fast could we get a rule in effect for monitoring? Because we still, going forward with minimization plans and ultimate requirements and compliance schedules and all that stuff, if we're trying to slay this beast all at once without data, without more detailed data, that's a challenge that would take longer. So a thought is we move forward as rapidly as possible with a monitoring plan. And it could be, for some of these industrial users, they might only have to take one sample or two samples 6 months apart if they say they don't use it, and then they're done. But for all the other SIUs, let's start I think we can get that rule through the full commission, the public process and all that. If we contain it, we can be working toward something more permanent with minimization and all that as those data are being collected. But how fast could we get a rule in place to start the monitoring component of this?
I think that's an open question. Commissioner,
I was just going to
Twitty?
ask, is a rule required to do that? I agree with everything Commissioner Ellison just said. And does that require it? Was going to be my.
good question for the department. And if it's required, then of course we understand that physical node, RIA's got to be, the economic piece has got to be. If you fast track it, then it's, the fast track is what date? And from that date, how far out do you go to actually start the process? So I think that's something that the department would have to come back to us and say, these are the steps, as they do always with rulemaking. What kind of rule will that be? Something that we can discuss.
But if we want to be very aggressive, they could do that in time for the next meeting and have an RIA because the costs are known. The analytical costs and sampling costs are known.
Let me,
Wait a second.
No.
Chairman Solomon.
let Julie, let the man, you went to them.
Okay.
Go.
I'll just say this, we do have authority to do investigative sampling for MPDS permit direct discharges. It gets a little bit confusing when you're going to SIUs. And so whether we would need a full-blown rule or a resolution, we would need to work with council on that to see if there was a way to make it any quicker. We have at this time many POTWs that have voluntarily said, put it in our MPDS permit, we'll have our SIU sample, and we are moving forward with that already.
Okay.
So
Chairman Solomon.
I'll try to complement what you just said. The department's got investigative powers to go in and sample wherever they need to if there's a known problem. It depends on the definition of what the known problem is and how expansive they can be. But in isolated, limited places where they know their problem, they have the ability to go in and look at people. But when you start going, as Julie just said, over into the POTWs and making them do things that all their citizens are paying for that are special when you can't identify what the problem is and you're not sure. So, well, things come down to it. What is the definition of the problem and what is the definition of sampling? When we say sampling, what's sampling? Is it sampling, ambient sampling at open water stations, or is it sampling inside a fence line? So big difference in where their authority goes and when they can activate it. And they just not real clear they have it at statewide basis either, probably not, but it could be argued that legally. So I know they've thought about it. I've talked to them about it. I think we needed some legal opinions on where to go. But definitions, again, are very important as to what their powers are or not for monitoring. We need to
Commissioner.
help them with the monitoring. I think we do, either a memo or something, but we need to be clear when we say monitoring, that this whole commission understands what kind of monitoring we're talking about and which method. Because again, 1633 is not even enforceable yet because the feds hadn't passed it, but we can do it for screening. Screening being sampling, but we got to have a legitimate test method before we can go hang people out with it.
Commissioner Ellison.
Okay, but if the potential expedited rule were to set forth the monitoring frequency and who has to monitor and that SIUs would be, that the monitoring of SIUs would be under the authority of the POTWs. And a lot of the things that Julie's presented and that we've talked about before, we could get that into a rule format quickly. But the question remains, is there a benefit to getting the monitoring started? Because we still do not fully apprehend the problem. So from a rule perspective, maybe they have some authority to make some people under some known specific circumstances to do investigative monitoring. But for statewide, for all SIUs under the POTW managed system and industrial dischargers under the DEQ, how fast could we get a rule out? And is there a benefit to expediting that process?
Well, and the answer to me, if you're asking me as a chair, yes, because I would like to have got it out in January and I'd like to get it out in March, right? And it goes with the minimization plans. I would do both. There's some part of monitoring that's part of minimization, but we should be able to hit that lick pretty good. And I think that's what we talked about, that we may not can agree on a numeric standard as a final number yet, and maybe we shouldn't. We can all debate that, but we can get to monitoring and minimization.
Then if we're not going to have a numeric standard for the minimization, then that needs to be.
We don't need one for the minimization. That's debatable. That is very debatable.
Okay, but in the rule, we need to, and to the point about how do we measure success, we would want to say that a minimization plan would need to describe some sort of percent reduction over time from a given SIU or industrial discharger.
Well, I don't want to get sucked into that because I think just to know which facilities out of 700 are bad players and to say that they try to do BMPs on their own and they've reduced by 50% just by doing monitoring and minimization plans, that's probably a pretty good lick at the beginning of short-term stuff we can do without having a final target. I mean, I think
How do you measure success of their minimization plan? How do you tell them what they have to do to comply? Minimization plan
that
is
is
pretty
what we
vague
have to
phrase.
decide. That's what we have to decide on. And other states, there's other documents in other states of doing this without a final number at the bottom that they have to do a treatment technology to. It can be qualitative or it can be quantitative.
Yeah.
Right? It
Okay.
doesn't have to be quantitative. I think that's a debate we can have. We don't have all that information in front of us today.
No, we don't. And that's why we didn't launch it or pull the trigger in January. The staff, the way I understand it, is asking, is this a minimization plan, the initiative, or is it a monitoring piece? And I think both of them are important, but you have to have the numbers and the numeric piece to monitor it. You have to be able to tell them what the level is. And the staff has been very clear on that, needing that number. Are we ready for a number today? No. But maybe something in March. But if I get a directive from the chair that you want to fast track this and the EMC wants to do that, then that's a message that you're sending to the committee. Then we work with the staff and then we can put together a plan to minimize it, to pollution prevention, product substitutions, which you're asking about the end users and their products, good housekeeping practices to make meaningful reductions in PFAS. Those are introduced to POTWs and they're introduced to SIUs. So I think this is good discussion to find out whether it's a monitoring piece or is it a minimization piece. But we certainly don't want to confuse the POTWs that are looking at the SIUs and the SIUs and the intakes, influent and effluent. So good questions. Commissioner Deerhake.
You said, are we ready for a number? No, we're not. But as Commissioner Ellison was pointing out, how do you judge your performance if you don't know what your end goal is?
Right. Agreed.
That's why I was suggesting a percent. Quick question, would not be, source reduction be part of the minimization plan? Or when these have been done before, are they two totally separate things?
The minimization plans that I'm familiar with, source reduction is generally part of it with a water quality standard goal.
Okay.
So I think that go back to the motion as the chair. The motion we did last time was they said they already had monitoring. They may not have the monitoring they need, but we said we want to go to minimization plans. That's the motion. So we need to get some kind of expedited minimization plan written into a draft rule as quick as we can. Right? That's just what we need to do. That's what we agreed to do back in a motion back in September. So now it's time to get it there. We need to do that. And we'll have to
Commissioner
work.
Twitty.
We're gonna have to work between now and March to start that process or get it 80% there. But we need to-
Commissioner Twitty.
Are you saying we have the data now to impose that minimization plan?
Yes,
Okay. Using the data the department already has?
yes, I think so.
With some, so that would then be some subset of identified users, and that data is defensible to apply that standard and that requirements to them very soon.
Yep.
Without having to go through a monitoring program that we're still going to do, but that's going to be part of the process. It's still yet to be done as well.
I'm reminded of early in the presentation when you mentioned mercury. Was that not a minimization plan on mercury?
So that's a great question. The minimization plan that was developed for mercury for MPDS dischargers was based on a TMDL and a water quality standard. We had a water quality standard of 12, and we had a TMDL that had a loading, and they gave an X% to the MPDS dischargers. And that was the MPDS dischargers' goal then to keep it within that loading. And then hence what we established is a minimization plan that would maintain it or lower it, decrease the loading for MPDS dischargers. As you know, mercury is very hard to treat, and it's really not, their sources are not point sources. It really is atmospheric in our state. And at the same time we implemented that, there was a mammogram and fluorine guidelines that were issued to get dentists to not use mercury and to take it out of their wastewater. So all that was happening. And that's why there was this minimization plan decided that way. But please know, when people say that the mercury had a minimization plan and it was not based on any numbers, that is not true. It was based on a TMDL. Okay? And then we also had a standard for mercury as well.
Commissioner Baumgartner.
I'll just put my 2 cents in if it's worth all that. Can you go to slide 3, please? I guess it's 3. It's my 2, changing them up on me. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. This one?
No, slide 2 is what I had it as. Yes. Our motion in September was to establish monitoring and to do reduction plans. That was the motion. That was the directive. So I think, in my opinion, that's what we should be doing, establishing monitoring and reduction plan. Maybe I'm being naive, but you've got the bones of that draft rule here that you've gone through now in 2 meetings, when I've heard. So can we get a draft rule quickly? Yes. It takes a while to get a rule through the process, but I think we could, the draft rule is, the bones are here already.
Commissioner Ellison.
I'd agree that we have a lot of the information, but the more, obviously, there are many and varied opinions and stakeholders and folks that are attentive to this whole issue. And so thinking of what we could get implemented fastest, and it's a question. I don't know, but depending on the final wording in the rule, there are interested parties that are going to come out of the woodwork and throw rocks at it or say we're wonderful. but the more contentious it is, the longer the process might be. There were over 10,000 emails on the groundwater rule after the public hearing last month. So that's why I was kind of asking, and I don't know the answer. What could we get in place fastest?
That's a good question for council, to have the legal authority to put something in place as a rule, or a temporary rule, or anything close to a rule without a fiscal note and an economic impact analysis on what it was going to cost. I think that is in the statute for RIAs or for rulemaking within the fiscal notes to put all that together. So I'm not sure how that could be put together, but that I would ask for to the department and seeing what those, and from legal standpoint, how fast can we move on this to get it right?
Let me just first say, I'm always happy to reach out to the department and work with you all to do whatever we need to get done, work with your general counsel staff. We can certainly push something forward. Temporary and emergency rules are not on the table for this stuff. This is permanent rulemaking. So as Commissioner Baumgartner mentioned, it does take some time to get through. I'm certainly happy to talk to Julie, talk to Director Rogers, Secretary Macemore, whoever over there, to see if a rule, a resolution, however we can move it fast, as quickly as possible to go forward. I cannot tell you what the legal authority would be now outside of a rule, but it's something that I'm happy to work with on. But if we're doing rulemaking, it's a permanent rule, not temporary or emergency.
Commissioner Deering.
I appreciate Mr. Baumgartner bringing us back to that slide. So it is source reduction plans for pretreatment programs. I will ask the division to help us remember the structure of the pretreatment rules that are currently in our programs, so that we could, is it possible to amend or add a requirement to the existing pretreatment program, pretreatment authorization program for municipalities, to add a PFAS source reduction planning step? And then the department can develop a model plan that would have various features, including percent reduction methodologies for identifying sources of significant industrial users that are potential troublesome areas, recommended levels of reduction that are health linked, et cetera.
So I think that's an excellent point, that in talking with staff, that would be the place we have to put it in 0900 to address the pretreatment facilities. We feel like we have the authority with the direct dischargers. Yes.
So it would mean coming to the committee with draft language for a pretreatment rule amendment to include a source reduction plan. And the source reduction plan, like with all other plans, does not have to be specified, detail by detail in the rule itself, right? Could be delegated to the division to design a model plan that's reviewed by the EMC. Yes, no?
I don't know. I don't know that we've ever done that, to be honest.
But this comes back to a point that I've been making all along about the delegation of the pretreatment program to municipalities. The state needs to play a role in monitoring the performance of these delegated programs. We do it for other programs, so we should be doing it for pretreatment as well.
Yeah.
So I do just want to be clear, though, when I say we feel we have the authority as far as monitoring. When you get to a screening level, minimization plan, so on, we would want to spell that out
Right,
in a rule.
right.
Chairman Solomon.
Yeah, and I want to go back to, and I agree with Commissioner Deerhake, I think when we have a problem, especially that the state has to be active in these pretreatment programs because these pretreatment programs look very different and are enforced, and the department will admit that in different regions. So I agree with that. I want to go back to a slide. If you'll go down, Julie, maybe to your data. Because I don't want to lose this here because it's keep going down to near the end. We got the direct dischargers and the PFAS levels. Keep going, keep going. Maybe go back up one, go back up one. So what I'm seeing here is if you look at order of magnitude and there's 100 of the 700 that are direct dischargers, they are by far worse based on the data than anything to do with the POTWs. Now, I know the sample's limited, but we don't know what's in these plants. But I think if you just go chasing people that are SIUs on a POTW, you're heading in the wrong spot because it is a spot we got to get to. But right now, the direct dischargers are more important from a magnitude standpoint of what we know than the indirects are, or the SIUs. So to think that the POTWs are the keys to the castle here, they're not. We've got to go get the direct dischargers. And y'all need to tell me whether you got the authority to go to do minimization plan on every one of them or not. So what the numbers say. What the numbers say, Stephanie.
I'll agree with the numbers. Could show that. Bringing it back to understanding the industrial users, what their NAICS codes are. We did a very detailed analysis to understand what those were. In the analysis that we did for the initial fiscal note, we had 56 industrial majors that were on our list to start going through. I believe our initial tranche of going through the NAICS codes that were suspected to be dealing with PFAS, I think it brought us down to 44, 46. When we went in and looked at the available data, what the prevalence in other states of PFAS being present, looking at the steps of a NIPD's program to assign an effluent limit, only 22 of those 56 are predicted based on our best professional judgment and engineering analysis to require treatment. I do disagree. I do think the SIUs are the ones that we need to be looking at because there are 600 of those potentially that could be dealing with PFAS. When we looked at our NAICS codes and we looked at Michigan data and other data, there were 464 that we could go out today and I would say we would find some level of PFAS.
Okay. And your slides don't say that. So, I mean, and to Kevin's point, half of yours are not major, they're also minor. And Kevin said, how do we know a minor is not slipping through the crack? You've got minor dischargers. And even at the same ratio, you've got to pick a ratio somewhere for minors and majors. And I don't know why the SIUs are any different than the direct dischargers would be, but to see the concentrations higher for the industrial, the directs, and then to say, no, it's the POTWs where you're saying there's more of the codes that are in the SIUs, but the data doesn't show that. This isn't being diluted as it comes through the system.
It would be probably more acceptable to be looking at mass loadings and not just looking at concentrations. And I think if we were to do that, I think we would have a different picture.
Okay.
When we also look at the average flows of those industrial users, they are going to be much lower and they are going to be potentially on par with SIUs.
I just don't want us to hang our hat on the SIUs
Yeah.
and say that the directs are not significant in this phase and we need to ignore them.
Yeah.
They are an equal part of the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, but we also keep in mind we have 4 data points there too.
I agree.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison.
I would ask the department before our next meeting, we mentioned this before, about funding to support this work, perhaps first to the POTWs or however the POTWs, because this is not going to be cheap. And so we did mention funding sources to you. If you could look into that and get back to us, even if it's in between meetings, that would be helpful information.
Thank you. We will look into that.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison. We're going to wrap this up. We have a hard stop at 3:30. I'd like to thank the staff for the presentation, questions, comments that the committee's had. It's robust. There's a lot going on here with PFAS and the minimization and just hopefully eliminating in some areas. But I want to go around and ask the committee members, are there any final comments? And then we'll try to tidy this up with your comments. Commissioner Deerhake.
Well, since it doesn't appear we've really given the staff any specific direction, I'll suggest that we give them a direction to come back to us next meeting with draft language for source reduction plan and a pretreatment program rule. And maybe just the skeleton of what a model source reduction plan might look like.
Okay.
But I do want to keep health in mind with all of this. So.
Okay. Commissioner Ellison, comments?
Just thank you. Thank you to the department and Julie. Very, very helpful stuff. Thanks.
Commissioner Baumgartner.
Yeah, I echo that too. Thank you. Appreciate you putting this together. It's been good conversations and I agree with Commissioner Deere. We need to move forward and with what the motion was originally and get this thing developed.
Mr. Twitty?
I'll add to Commissioner Deerhake's too. I would ask can the department before the next committee meeting look at what powers you have currently that don't require rules that could be used to achieve some of these goals, additional monitoring, imposing that requirement on POTWs to push that down to the SIUs, anything there. I'm concerned, we all each have hundreds of emails in our inbox from concerned citizens about PFAS. We've known that this is a big issue for a long time, and I'm concerned we continue to have meetings and we're not moving the ball far enough down the field. Can we move that ball faster? And we need to be looking for ways to do that.
Final comments from our Chair Solomon.
None for me, sir.
Okay.
None to me.
I'd like to,
Mr. Chairman, I
Commissioner
would just say, Commissioner Tweedy was just saying, what existing tools do we have? The permit program is an existing tool. So please be sure that we understand what freedom we already have to work and regulate the discharge of these PFAS through permitting and where the gaps are that need to be filled so that you have appropriate authority to deal with those discharge limits that we feel need to be imposed.
thank you, Julie, and thank you for the comments from the committee members. The notice then today has been very robust to the public. This has been live. We have coverage here today, social media, and the attendance level is high because of the subject matter. Due to that and the urgency today expressed by the MC Chair Solomon, putting this on a fast track, I would like to direct the director, DWR Rogers, to assimilate his team and staff, and I'll be calling for a committee meeting in February, and to set up a date and make that available to the public, that they can respond to this meeting today and the notes that they've taken online and what we've discussed here today, and direct Director Scott to get his staff together, get as much as you can, and we will have a meeting in February, so that notice should go out as quick as we can get it out. We have to make I think a 30-day notice or whatever we have to do, but being what it is, and I sort of disagree a little bit with Commissioner Twitty, but he's right. We're not kicking it down the road. This is major. This is for the whole state of North Carolina. And again, as I've said earlier, we don't want to set any standards that we're going to regret later without full study. And this is committee work, and we'll get it to the MC when it's ready. So if you would, Director Rogers, do you have any comments to close the committee out from the department?
So we'll move forward with this. In just the notes I've taken related to what the agenda is for the February meeting and what we want to be looking at. Obviously, we'll report back on the request about potential funding for monitoring. I think that's a great suggestion. Also, what are the mechanisms that we currently have under our authority has been suggested to monitor, expand monitoring, and will it take rulemaking from that perspective? And then I'm assuming you'd like to talk more about the implementation plans and minimization plans and development of those.
Whatever in the rulemaking process, whatever OSBMs require of a fiscal note, RIA, that we're building this framework to get those, all this information to them early on. So it won't take them to 2025. And I know they got a lot to do as they did before, but if we can build this to be effective and efficient, we can get this information in February, our February meeting. And then be ready to give another committee meeting in March and keep the EMC up to date. And I'd like to be able to at least announce that tomorrow, Mr. Chairman, at the EMC meeting, that this committee it will be meeting again to take care of this issue and concern.
Just so I'm clear, with regards to the development of rulemaking, what we've had question one, where is that one? Of how far do you want us to go with the rulemaking? Do you want us to phase? What aspects do you want us to look at? All of that impacts the ability of what we'll calculate from an RIA perspective as well. And I think the other key is also target level of how we're going to manage that. And I'm assuming that would be further discussed at the meeting in February. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments from the committee and look forward to working with y'all.
Thank you, Director Rogers. Julie, thank you. We'll conclude the meeting and it is adjourned. Thank you.